Negative News and Crisis Communication, Chapter 17. So, we have here a picture of what is obviously a crisis. and not everything that you have to write about will be flaming disaster, but, we have disasters in our future, and part of business is handling them. So, grab your guided lecture notes and get ready. For an overview, we're going to look at direct and indirect strategies, how to deliver the bad news in writing and in person, and spikes, which is a medical technique for giving bad news that you can employ yourself. So managers and negative messages. Here are some common types. You are going into management, so you will have to reject people. Job applications, applicants, promotion requests, project assignments. You're going to have to give negative evaluations or feedback. You're going to have to address policy change and process change and talk about company shifts or bad news. So these are all in your future. This is where you're going. Get ready and know that there is a process that you can walk through as you craft your bad news messages. So as you move from management into leadership of your organization, your crises, C-R-I-S-E-S, which is plural, will get more intense. Financial, personnel, organizational, technological, and natural disasters. There are all sorts of issues that are coming up that as you move into leadership, you're going to need to talk about, address, plan for, and just have a sense of how to navigate bad news and how to get the best out of your people and your tools and your timing while dealing with difficult issues. So there are two ways to address bad news: direct and indirect. For direct, there's always going to be bad news. So routine messages with bad news will probably be direct. There's a 2-day delay. You can give someone that news, particularly if you know that person would rather just hear it from you. So be direct. You want to think about neutral messages and good news. Be direct on those. Don't hide your neutral messages that just give facts or good news. Don't hide it in an indirect method. Think about your reader needs. Sometimes if someone is unlikely or unable to read a whole message, maybe they're reading on their phone, you might need to give them the bad news directly. Wait, the shipment was delayed. Even if typically you would give them the bad news indirectly. And think about the position of hierarchical power. Sometimes your boss will give you bad news straight out. They won't be as gentle with you. So where you are in the hierarchy really, affects how and when you hear the bad news. So indirect, when it's really bad news, or when you have resistant readers, someone who doesn't want to acknowledge the bad news, when there's an explanation needed, when the reasons really matter. And so if you tell someone the bad news first and the reasons are in the middle of the message, so here's the bad news, now here's a list of reasons, they are unlikely to read them. So you would put the reasons first, following the indirect method, so that because the reasons matter, you want the other people to be aware of the reasons before they get to the bad news. And when you are in a lower position of power, typically you're going to be more indirect about giving bad news. Why? Well, if you've ever heard, don't kill the messenger, be aware that's because sometimes the messenger who delivers bad news has gotten killed in the past. Someone will be angry about the bad news and they'll attack you if you're giving it. So you want to be thoughtful about that and preserve whatever goodwill you can for your own safety. So when an audience is going to be pleased, somewhat interested, or neutral, you're very direct. Or they can't read the whole message. So they're on a flight, they are on their phone, whatever. Typical direct messages are routine messages, neutral messages, or good news. So there are some bad news messages that would be direct messages, but that's when it's expected bad news. The 2-day delay, the cancellation of lunch. That's not something you need to hide usually. So more hierarchical power means you're more likely to be direct. Do this. Be indirect when your audience is going to be displeased or disappointed, uninterested, hostile, or unlikely to read the reasons. And know that the typical indirect messages are almost always bad news, very bad news, or they are persuasive towards a resistant audience. So if you have an audience that's already made up their minds and you are trying to address them and be persuasive and change their minds, you might not start off with your goal. You might give reasons and show empathy first. And swayed, so be suasive, be persuasive, move the other person towards your point of view. And who gives indirect messages the most? Those with less hierarchical power. So if you're lower in power, you are more likely to use indirect messaging. If you're higher in power, you're more likely to use direct messaging. Does that make sense? Okay. Expect to see this on a test and be aware of it in the workplace. This is something to know and think about. Please review table 17.2. So go to your book, look that over, think about it, what it means. And let's look at a scenario where a TA is replying to a student email. So the student has asked for a grade review. Here's the TA's message. Your request for a grade review has been denied. Unfortunately, the review period has ended. See syllabus policy. I would be happy to provide resources for the next assignment. Okay, so do you see the organizational pattern here? First, we have the denial. So is that direct or indirect? It's direct. When you have the message first, the bad news first, that's a direct message. Then we have the reason. The review period has ended. And then we have a closing. I would be happy to provide resources for the next assignment. Okay, let's look at the next one. Think about whether it's direct or indirect. That was direct. What is this? Thank you for your request for a grade review. So this is an updated version. What is that? That thank you. It's a buffer, right? So this is indirect. Then we have the reasons. Unfortunately, the review period has ended. See syllabus policy. Okay, there's our reason. Your request for a grade review has been denied. So there's our bad news. I would be happy to provide resources for the next assignment. All right, there's our thoughtful closing and a look forward. Now, you might not have all this, and in fact, the TA did not have all this in different paragraphs. This was one single paragraph with the request for a grade review in the third sentence in the middle of the message as the bad news in an indirect message would be. Okay, so this is how you structure it, and this is how you think about it. I would urge you, if you have bad news to give and the person's going to be upset, to use the indirect method. Put your reasons first. So we look at that structure, and here it is all plotted out. We have the buffer, and in a direct delivery, we have no buffer, right? Now, I kind of like a buffer anyway, in direct and indirect, with the main idea, and in this case, bad news following. So my version of direct would have a buffer and then main idea and then reasons and then conclusion. But there's a switch, right? In the indirect method, reasons come before the bad news. And the bad news should be in the middle of the middle. Okay? So here is a direct approach example. We have an argument. Since the company's founding 25 years ago, we've provided regular repair service for all our electronic appliances. That's a fact, right? So it's a buffer, and it begins a logical argument. This service has been an important selling point as well as a source of pride for our employees. Another fact, another part of that buffer, building the argument. However, we are paying a high price for our image. Last year, we lost $500,000 on our repair business. Okay, So there's the argument. So this is the direct method with a buffer, the direct message with a buffer. And at the end of that first paragraph, we have our basically thesis. We are paying a high price for our image with the $500,000 loss. Okay? Because of your concern over these losses, you asked me to study the pros and cons of discontinuing our repair service. With the help of John Hudson and Susan Lefkowitz, I've studied the issue for the last 2 weeks and have come to the conclusion that we have been embracing an expensive, impractical tradition. By withdrawing from the electric appliance repair business, we can substantially improve our financial performance without damaging our reputation with customers. Okay, so here is kind of a secondary conclusion. And this person is showing, okay, I've done a thorough study. I talked to other people. Here's my argument. This conclusion is based on 3 main points that are covered in the following pages. It is highly unlikely that we will ever be able to make a profit in the repair business. Service is no longer an important selling point with customers. Closing down the service operation will create few internal problems. Okay, so here is our direct approach. Now, what about the same information in an indirect approach? What would that look like? Here we go. Since the company's founding 25 years ago, we've provided regular repair service for all our electronic appliances. The service has been an important selling point as well as a source of pride for our employees. So those facts, that buffer remains the same. However, the repair business itself has consistently lost money. So now we have moved away from the argument and just summarized that it is a problem. Now we get to questions, right? The following pages present my findings for your review. So it's going to end with a recommendation. We don't start with the recommendation. 3 basic questions are addressed. What's the extent of our losses? Would withdrawal hurt our sales? And what would the internal repercussions of closing down the repair business be? So if you're looking at this, you can see that we don't even have the bad news contained here. This asks 3 questions. It's going to go through all these reasons and get to the end and have a recommendation. If you're looking at something really big and you are lower on the totem pole and you've been asked to, sorry for using that term, but you're lower in the hierarchy and you've been asked to make this change, then, to make this recommendation, then you probably want to phrase it as, I'm answering these 3 questions. And I will tell you that the American thesis statement is usually a direct message with 1 sentence that forecasts organization. However, the British version has questions that you ask that end with a thesis statement. So you'd be kind of following the British version. So here is the wonderful indirect organization metaphor that I want you to remember. Look at this hamburger, picture this hamburger, whether you eat hamburger or not. You can imagine that it's vegan and picture some other kind of burger. But you have a top bun, which is your buffer, and maybe background information, like the facts that we saw earlier, that kind of, we have agreed upon facts that ground our argument in everyone in agreement. We're all in agreement here. And once someone nods and agrees with you, whether it's in person or in writing, you're starting to sell them on something. That's why car salesmen will always ask questions at the beginning to get you to say yes. It's a beautiful day, isn't it? I mean, hopefully it's a beautiful day. But you'll say, oh, yeah, you know. And once you are agreeing with them, you are more likely to agree with them in the future. I know that seems crazy, but psychologically that works. So then we get to the cheese. So you're going to have cheese on this burger, whether you like cheese or not. And those are your reasons. So if I say you're a little cheesy, it means you have a lot of reasons. So those reasons are valuable and important in this particular metaphor. They are critical aspects of giving the bad news. You have your reasons first without saying the bad news, which is very difficult to do. And then you have the meat or protein, and that is your bad news. So tell them once, don't keep repeating it. And if you can, put it in passive voice, and we'll look at that in the future. So later in this presentation. And the bottom bun is your goodwill gesture in a positive, forward-looking tone. So looking at doing business in the future, other opportunities, etc. So this is a great way to think about, a great metaphor. And I will say right now that apparently the people who mow the yard, who I'm very grateful to, have shown up. So, as usual, this is life. I'm sorry if you hear the background noise. All right, so what are your buffers? They can be a thank you and a statement of appreciation or gratitude. It can be as easy as thank you for coming in today. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me. Then you have a fact, which is your best news. It's usually related to the bad news, a statement of agreement. It might be something objective, like we've lost $500,000. Now, you don't want it to be something that they're going to argue with, like you are overstating the case and they're going to get fixated on that fact. You want it to be a statement of agreement. And then a compliment is another buffer, something true and sincere, specific. So you might say, you worked 52 hours last week and you've consistently put in a lot of work on this project. We greatly appreciate it. So that would be a compliment and then a statement of appreciation. It's okay to pile multiple buffers into your buffer as long as it seems authentic and sincere. You might have an apology. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for waiting. I'm so sorry that happened to you. Be real, be true, but know that acknowledging that allows everyone to move forward with the conversation. Okay, now I gave you this picture of a doctor with a child patient because we are going to look at spikes later. And as a doctor, if you're going to the medical field, whether you are a healthcare management major or going to become a doctor or a dentist, you're going to have to give people bad news frequently. So you want to become good at that. It's important. It's a critical part of your job, and it's going to be critical for the patient's health because their attitude towards their care influences everything, right? Now, if you're giving bad news in writing, be aware that you cannot know where it's going to end up. Okay? Be very cautious and aware. Your primary audience is probably not the last step in that bad news. There are multiple secondary audiences who can get the bad news. You can't control the reactions as well as you can in person. So bad news in writing is much more difficult to deal with. You can't adjust your methods based on your reading of the situation or the reaction of the other person. So that's a problem because you can't control reactions if you can't adjust your methods. And you can't determine if it's bad or good news because you can't give immediate feedback. So sometimes you'll tell someone something and discover that it might in fact be interpreted by them to be good news. Such as, I'm sorry, but we're going to, we are going to have to lay you off, but we're going to give you 6 months severance and a good recommendation. And the person might say, you know what, I was worried about how to leave this job because my mother has become ill. And it's so nice that I have that severance because I'm moving back to Georgia to take care of her, and this is actually going to help me a lot. So what you thought was bad news turns out to be good news for this particular person. All right, so here's an indirect example. So here's our strategy. We put the buffer or cushion first. So think about it as a cushion. It softens the impact of the bad news. Thank you for your email. So a statement of appreciation. We appreciate your interest in our promotion for a free cheeseburger at Shady's in Richardson. Your reasons? We are writing to let you know that this promotion was extremely popular. More than 25,000 people requested access to the program. As you may know, our restaurant has a capacity of about 200 people, and we're a small, locally owned business. So here are your reasons. So it was popular. Now think about if you applied for a program and they said, there were 10 slots and 2,000 people applied. Well, at that point, once they tell you that, you're going to think, wow, man, it's difficult to get into that. I didn't realize it was so hard. Suddenly you're preparing mentally and emotionally to hear that rejection, and you're in charge of it, not the other person. Now we get to the negative news. This unexpected increase in demand has resulted in a temporary suspension and reevaluation of the program. Although we are unable to deliver a free cheeseburger to you, you can use your UTD comment card for a discount. If you show this email, we'll add a soft drink and medium fries to your sandwich or salad order at no additional cost. Wow. So there's a suspension and reevaluation of the program, so that's negative news. Here's more negative news. Although we are unable to deliver a free cheeseburger to you, and notice that that is the middle of the middle, right? The bad news is not even a complete sentence, and that's something you should aim for. Try not to put the bad news in a complete sentence. Although we are unable to deliver a free cheeseburger to you, you can use your UTD comment card for a discount. Wonderful. So we have something great that can add value to your experience. So you're not going to get the free cheeseburger, but you're going to get a discount. And if you show this email, we'll add a soft drink and medium fries to your sandwich or salad order at no cost. So wow, I am getting something free. It's pretty cool. Here's a pleasant close, and it redirects. We're proud members of the Richardson community and hope that you will come see us soon. The drink and fries offer ends this semester, December 2nd, 2020. Thank you for your interest in our small business. Wow. Okay. So somehow with my mask on, I'm going to have to go get a burger. Now, this is just made up, but I do like Shady's in Richardson. It's really good. All right. So here we have our redirect. And see how this is organized? We have our bad news in the middle of the middle. It's a nice little template for understanding. Why does bad news delivery matter? Well, it allows you to protect the company, yourself, employees, and company property. So all of these things are protected. If you have not seen George Clooney's film Up in the Air, I urge you to do so, because you will actually see a man who makes his living giving bad news to people, and it is fascinating. It is one of those movies that you should have on and you should go watch. So, after you've watched it, what does George Clooney's character do well when he fires someone? Okay, so go watch the movie and think about what he does really well. What works in the moment of bad news delivery? So what happens? And think about the time, the room, how he establishes this whole situation. It is a fascinating movie. So be aware that there's a lot going on there. Okay, so let's also, let's apply, sorry, you may hear that somebody is trying to call me. There's a lot of buzzing going on. I apologize. Let's say you're a supervisor and you've been given the task of discussing repeated tardiness with an employee whose name is Chris. Chris has frequently been late for work, and the problem has grown worse over the last 2 weeks. The tardiness is impairing not only Chris's performance, but also that of the entire work team. Your manager has instructed you to put it into it. The desired result is for Chris to stop his tardiness behavior and improve his performance. So we've looked at some written versions. Now let's think about the same indirect methods, but applied in person. You have some advantages, right? When you are face-to-face, particularly if you've watched Up in the Air, you can see why face-to-face can matter. It's stressful, but it gives you more flexibility in addressing the bad news, the other person, their emotional state, reading the situation. So if you were to do this in person, would you stop by Chris's cubicle and simply say, "Get to work on time or you're out"? What do you think that Chris would feel about that? Would you invite Chris out to a nice lunch and then let him have it? Would you write Chris a stern email? Or would you ask Chris to come to your office and discuss the behavior with him in private? What would you do? Probably not the email, right? Probably not stopping by his cubicle, because that's in public, and threatening him and letting everyone else know that he's going to lose his job is not going to help anything. Inviting him out to lunch, so number 2 or 4 are possibilities. Would you let him have it, though? I don't think so. And usually going out to lunch should be a celebratory thing, right? You should take someone out to a nice lunch and tell them something happy, not something horrible. Coming to your office is more appropriate, right? It's private. It still has the business associated with it at the same time, and it's where you would deal with this. So you would bring Chris into your office and then probably use the indirect approach to address the situation. So you have a difference between internal and external communications. So if you bring Chris into your office and he is your direct report, he reports to you, that is an internal communication. Your conversation is internal. It is inside the organization. So whether you have it on the phone or by email or by Microsoft Teams, as long as you're both employees in that organization, you are having internal communications. When you go outside the organization, that is an external communication. So an email with a client, a phone call with a client, a vendor, these are external communications. They're not within that organization. So know these terms. So let's think about delivering bad news in person. When you had to make the decision about how to handle the situation with Chris, it's stressful to decide how you are going to structure your bad news. And doctors deal with this all the time. They talk to families, they talk to individuals, and they have to tell them things and help those people get in a position to make decisions and to feel okay about it. They don't want to become the enemy, right? Because they still have to work to help make everyone better. So there is actually a... sorry, I keep getting messages and I apologize. I try to turn off everything, but it is almost impossible. They have an acronym called SPIKES, which allows them to walk through a series of steps to better handle bad news. And so as you deal with your own doctors, people in a medical setting, anywhere, you probably have encountered this, but it's useful no matter what kind of bad news you're looking at. So first, set up an interview or appointment. So make it official. If you want to talk to Chris, then set up a time to talk to Chris in your office. Don't just take him out to lunch and let him have it. The P is about perception. So does Chris perceive himself to be late? Does he perceive that he's having trouble? If you're talking about patients, what are their perceptions about their treatment, about the testing? And then you prepare for what you are going to do next. I is invitation, right? So what do they want to know? There are some people who don't want to know very much, and this is where medical information differs a little bit. In the job, you're probably going to give information that's relevant, and as the boss, you get to decide what's relevant. I'm so sorry, there's somebody in my backyard. And then, but if you're a medical doctor, maybe they don't want to know everything. Maybe thinking about their cancer makes them feel sick. So then we look at need to know, the information that they need to know right now. What are the options? What are the treatments? What are the decisions that they're going to have to face? The E is for empathy, the patient's emotions, and you have to show that you care and that you understand that they are addressing this, that they're going through something. And then S is where you talk about strategy and summary. So you summarize the interaction. All right, we've talked about your options today. We've talked about the test results. We've talked about your options today. And the fact that you will need to make a decision soon about whether to have the surgery or not, or the treatment or not. If you do choose to do the treatment, you need to make that decision. We need to have a final decision within the next 3 days so we can schedule everything. So that would be our strategy. This is, and it seems difficult, but this is here's the actual, this is a screenshot of their protocol elements from the Oncologist, which is a journal for doctors who treat cancer. This is what they walk through with those patients, and it's very important that you go through these stages because they lead to the most cooperation, the feeling of support that patient needs. So here are some ways that you can use this yourself. So step 1 is setting, right? So that's when you prepare the room, pick the time strategically. Think about if you've watched Up in the Air, this is going to become even more important as you think about like firing someone. When do most people lose their jobs? What day of the week? All right, you have an answer there, right? If you don't, go watch the movie. Um, you're going to prepare the content, limit distractions. You want to maybe invite other parties in as needed if the bad news needs to have other parties present. And you want to think about protecting the company. How bad is this? So here are some sample phrases. Before we look at this performance review, would you like to have your manager here? So that would be the other parties. So you're kind of giving them an indication this might be bad news, but you are giving them a little bit of control. Can I get you a water? Yes or no, right? So we give them a little bit of sense of control, of care, of courteous interaction. Now we go to perception. This is where you gather information and assess expectations, and if they have unrealistic expectations, if they think they've been called in for this meeting to get a raise, you want to know that. So do you know why we're meeting today? Or how do you think our project is going so far? So this seems, relatively innocuous, but it allows you to gather information and them to have a better sense of what you're going to talk about. Okay, now we go to invitation. How much does the person want to know? So how much do they want to know about the project review process? How much do you need to know about how your score for your annual review is compiled? You might answer questions. We want to talk about your project's budget. Do you want to know how we created that budget? So if anyone else can be spoken to, you want to get that permission in the invitation. Should we bring other people into this? Can I share this information? If it's health information, you really want to be aware of that. Now we get to knowledge. So this is where you give your bad news in simple language and in small chunks without jargon. So think about how difficult that is for a doctor to do. What does this mean to the person? You want to give them a summary and maybe a warning. So think about that and check information, understanding and impact. I've given you a lot of information. Is there anything I can clarify? Do you have any questions? So there's our knowledge. Now we get to emotion. Address the emotions with empathy. This may be a surprise. I know you've put in a lot of years with this company. I also feel disappointed that this project didn't go well. Think about a variety of responses. How might they react? Identify emotions, but don't fake identification with them. So if you look like you are faking, if you're not authentic, people get angry. So think about that, and be in touch with yourself, because the worst thing is when someone seems like they feel sorry or they feel emotions and they don't. So don't say, I know just how you feel. If you want a test question on emotion, if saying I know just how you feel is a good aspect of how to address emotion with empathy, no, it's not. So let me give you a little warning, that's on the test. Clarify that understanding. And then finally we get to strategy or summary. This is the end point on the bad news. You want to summarize the main ideas and set up the next steps. Here's what we're going to do in the future. So if someone is losing their position, maybe maybe they get severance pay, and maybe they get extended insurance, and so you're going to make sure that they get what they need to make decisions in the future. So you're gonna, here's where your checks are gonna go. We've coordinated so that this happens. So you don't repeat the bad news, but you summarize what you've said and look at strategy in the future. So let's take this on campus. This is a small example, but let's say you're the treasurer for the new UTD Swiss Art Club. So we have a Swiss Art Museum that's coming to UTD because we were able to, we were gifted some art, and so we're going to build that. And you have a leadership meeting. John, the vice president, wants to use the university club funds to rent a bus to go to the Dallas Museum of Art, to pay for students to eat Swiss cheese sandwiches and to buy Swiss art postcards to boost club morale. Unfortunately, you know that there's no benefit to the sandwiches and postcards. Nobody cares, all right? You know these students. Students have actually driven themselves to the museum in the past and it wasn't a big deal, so why have a bus? That seems crazy. And with these purchases, your entire budget will be gone and everyone's going to need to do extra work to fundraise. So you know that this is a bad idea, but you've got to walk through the spikes process with John. So, how do you use the spikes process? Can you do that? All right, take a few minutes to do that and think about adding this to your portfolio. How you tell someone no is a process that you need to work through. What setting do you tell John in? What is John's perception? So what questions do you ask for John's perception? What invitation do you make to John to talk about this and to better understand? What knowledge do you want to give John? What's the information? What are John's emotions? And how do you assess where John is? And then what are the summary and next steps? All right? It's silly, but as you know, small things like this, small saying no to someone, can escalate into a lot of drama. What is it they say that the greatest battles are fought, the most vicious battles are fought over the smallest stakes? S-T-A-K-E-S, not like meat. But small things. This is why people in offices go crazy over the use of their staplers, right? And it seems dumb, and yet people's emotions get all tangled up in things like this. So you want to be aware that sometimes walking through a process like this can really help address situations. Now, here's another practice. You observed and documented an intern arriving late and taking long breaks for the past 2 weeks. You were in charge of this intern, so you're a manager. So this person came in but didn't come in. You're going to write a brief summary of this conversation you need to have. Okay? Take a few minutes, do that, pause. Now here's another one. You observed and documented an intern making TikToks in the corporate boardroom. What conversation can you have with that person? So you're the manager in both these cases. What do you say to that person and how do you walk them through the process? These would go in your portfolio in the other section. So these are the types of things that you can polish and practice that show that you've put some thought into it. And they are useful for your own future because as you go into management, you want to have these questions and, phrases there. You want to have a way to deal with them, a process to apply so that you feel more in control and at the same time you handle the situation. So let's look at a quick case study. What brand is this? Whose brand is this? Who's Target, right? So we want to look at good and bad news. How do you know something is bad news? So situations where you may not think that you need to be careful about messaging and it turns out that you do. So sometimes you will hear something that seems like good news and, oh, it's bad news, at least to someone else. And you want to think about the channel for news delivery and how you respond to the public. So in this case, Target changed how it labels toys, and customers suddenly started freaking out. So they decided to use gender-neutral language. And here is the spokesperson who said Barbies are still going to be with Barbies and Legos will still be with Legos. We just didn't feel like having a sign that said boys bedding was necessary. Okay, so this is what the spokesperson said. Here's Business Insider noting, Target has created an explosion of anger on the right, with Fox News devoting at least 4 segments to churning up pointless outrage over it. All right, so I guess Business Insider thought it was pointless, but it was a big deal. Some critics say they're not going to shop there with this change. So that affects Target. That's a thought. So they see this as very bad news. And then what happens? There's a Target troll. Mike Melgard pretended to be an official customer service representative on Target's Facebook page. So he created an identity on Facebook and then responded to people who had posted to Target. I am extremely outraged at your stupidity for doing away with gender separation at your stores. I just want you to know that if it means making 20% of your customers happy to loose the other 80%, you just did it. I wish I had known this before I went shopping this weekend. Thank God I haven't bought school clothes yet for my kids. You lost my business. All right, and then here is our troll. Lisa, you sound like you need a Snickers. We sell them by the packs here at Target. Stop on down and buy some. All right, I shouldn't find this humorous, but Target was not ready for this, right? And so here's the troll, still going. How ridiculous can you get? Seriously, more, and I'm not going to say this word, of America, you can bet my hard-earned money won't be spent at Target. And here is our troll. He or she quotes, and good Lord, Shelley, we at Target don't even know how to respond to this one. And here we go. All right, so there's more. All right. And take a look. You may want to pause this. What can be learned here? Well, the troll continued for 16 hours on Facebook, responding to customers. How could Target have prepared better? What went wrong and what went well? So, what do you think? As a case study, this is an opportunity for you to assess the situation, right? So one, should Target have been monitoring their Facebook page? Probably better than they did. So 16 hours is way too long for the troll to have been responding as Target, right? That's a problem. So how could they have prepared better? What do you think? What would have been a good way to handle this implementation of gender neutral language? Because it supposedly was based on customer feedback. What would you do? What do you think? And then we talked about what went wrong, and I implied a few things. You probably have some other thoughts too about social media, about these customers and how to reach them. So think about what went wrong, and then what went well here. Was there anything that went well? Think about it. Okay. Now let's look at an active voice sentence. What does an active voice sentence sound like? We cannot offer you the internship for this summer. Okay? So that is active, right? What does a passive voice sentence sound like? The summer internship cannot be offered, right? Who is doing the action? It's hidden, right? It cannot be offered by zombies. So if you can't tell whether a sentence is passive or active, then add by zombies to the end of the sentence, or see if there is a by anywhere in that sentence, if the actor is hidden in a by phrase. So I was downsized by zombies. She was hit in the head by zombies. The internship can not be offered by zombies. How do you apply this? So how do you revise a sentence, for example? So we cannot offer you the position is an independent clause. It's a complete thought. And I urge you to have complete thoughts, one thought per sentence. Now, this is the one time when I really think that you should have a long sentence to give bad news, or a longer than normal sentence. A shorter sentence is better for good news. Okay? And a longer sentence that sounds thoughtful, that's coupled with good news, that's after reasons, is better for bad news. So if you want to not have your bad news be in a short sentence, add a subordinating conjunction like while. While we cannot offer you the position. Okay? And then add your comma because it's not a complete thought. Now we have to add the rest of the thought. We encourage you to apply for a local internship at our affiliate station in Dallas. Okay? So they can't offer you the internship that you want in New York, but they can encourage you to apply for a different internship. So that bad news is now in a dependent clause, right? It cannot stand on its own. Whereas we encourage you to apply for a local internship at our affiliate station in Dallas, that is a complete thought. It is good news in an independent clause. Okay? So there we go. It could stand on its own. And here we have the passive voice, or not passive, it's active. We cannot offer you. And note you are identifying yourself and really linking yourself with the bad news. While the New York internship is available only to juniors. I love that. We encourage you to apply for the local internship at our affiliate station in Dallas. So here we have our while, which we can change it to although, which is another subordinating conjunction. And an independent clause, again, is a complete thought, while a dependent clause is an incomplete thought. We use pronouns that are personal, like I and we and you, when we give good news. When you give bad news, back away from those. Talk about the situation more in general, and you can discuss the situation or policy. Company policy prohibits the hiring of relatives. Would be a great way to turn somebody down if, their uncle works for the same company, right? Because that way you're not saying, I cannot hire you. You're saying company policy prohibits this hiring. It doesn't matter. I always say that, one of the nice things about passive voice is it sounds like God made a decision. I don't know why you cannot be hired, but it's somehow someone bigger than me and more important than me made that decision, and we can't fight it. So let's look at this bad news in an email. Here we have ABC New York Summer 2020 Internship. Dear Ms. Rhodes, thank you for applying to the ABC New York Summer 2020 Internship. This year, more than 8,000 students applied for 10 positions in the New York office. All right, so notice you've had your buffer, your statement of appreciation, and then a fact that is going to prepare them for the good news, or not the good news, the bad news, right? Because 8,000 people applied for 10 positions, woo, you getting that position becomes less likely. So you've already thought, wow, there's so much competition, it would be hard to get it. The quality of applicants was high and the requirements were strict. Applicants needed to have junior status reflected in their transcripts with at least 6 credit hours in marketing and 9 credit hours in information technology or computer science. Although the New York internship is available only to juniors, see, remember our bad news? See how it's in the middle of the middle? Think about our burger here. We encourage you to apply for a local internship at our affiliate station in Dallas. So we have this subordinate clause, and then we have our good news. You can locate the job and application form, and then we have the address. We appreciate your interest in ABC. Regards, Brett Meyer, and then we have the block. So this is a good, bad news email, right? It works. It has all the parts. And if you received this, even though you'd be disappointed, you'd think, well, there were 8,000 people and 10 positions. All right, and I don't even meet the credit hours. I didn't have, I'm not a junior. So, wow, so many reasons that I couldn't get this, but they really like me. They want me to apply in Dallas. So if we look at those parts, we had the great subject line. We had the buffers with the gratitude and fact. We have that first sentence in the paragraph, and I'm going to warn you, a lot of people put the bad news as the first sentence in the paragraph. Don't do that. That's not the middle of the middle. You want to have some sort of other fact, another part of the buffer to brace before we get to the bad news. And so note that both of these sentences are not the bad news. Here's our bad news, right? Middle of the middle. and it is subordinate. It's in a subordinate clause, so it can't stand alone, which, while it doesn't seem that important, plays a really important role in shifting the tone and the focus to the positive. We have that forward-looking statement with, you can locate this, so move on, do something. Here is a call to action and a thank you. So, we appreciate your interest, and then the closing and signature block. All right, signature block does not actually have a signature. So in review, take out your guided lecture notes. Make sure you have good answers for all these. You should even have some examples that you can include in your portfolio. So, apply this. Walk through it. We had some scenarios where you could apply it. Using buffers, think about what buffers you can use and when you use them and why you use them. Think about positioning the bad news strategically, and while, although, and because are all words that create subordinate or dependent clauses, right? So this is important, and this is something that you can do. Walk through this process, and you should be able to deal with the bad news and address it strategically. Always end with a statement of goodwill and alternatives, or a win-win situation. Don't repeat the bad news. I'm going to repeat that over and over. I have students who will write a bad news letter and constantly apologize for the bad news. I am so sorry. I know you're disappointed. Stop that, okay? Look ahead, be sincere, avoid cliches, and focus on the positive. Now, what are other ways you can end your bad news statement? Well, if it's with a customer, you can give them advice or coupons or samples, gifts. You can even address resale opportunities or promotions. So something that they can do and get that is good, that they're excited about. So they're upset about their stereo, but guess what? You've given them a coupon for 25% off, and there's a resale opportunity. So thank you very much. I hope you've learned a lot. This is probably one of the most important things you can learn to do in communication, is to deliver bad news, because when you don't do it right, it will haunt you. It will be the thing that people will remember you for, and it will be the problem with relationships. But as you're aware, part of going into management is giving bad news. That is what a manager is hired to do, and navigating that bad news. So applying a process and knowing that there are processes out there that you can walk through to evaluate how you're going to give the bad news and prepare yourself for a situation you don't feel comfortable with, that's going to help. So take a deep breath. You can do this, and have a great day. Bye.